The Federal Communications Commission voted this week along party lines, 3-2, to roll back net neutrality regulations imposed in 2015 by former President Barack Obama, and just like that, ill-informed liberal heads exploded as they exclaimed the internet was now destroyed, Armageddon had arrived and so on. Of course, that simply isn't the case, and former FCC Chairman Robert McDowell joined MSNBC's fact-efficient host Oli Vishay on Thursday to try and explain what really happened in order to quell the mass hysteria among many on the left. According to the Daily Caller, McDowell explained that net neutrality, which has no legal definition, was little more than the imposition of Title II regulations from the Communications Act of 1934 that transformed the once wide-open Internet into a tightly regulated public utility that would stifle competition and innovation, pretty much the opposite of what many liberals like Vishay argue. Vishay suggested that the repeal of net neutrality would allow large corporations like Facebook to lawlessly freeze out new startup tech companies. But McDowell stated, so, you have the Federal Trade Commission Act, for instance, you have the Clayton Act and the Sherman Act. Those are three very powerful federal statutes that kept the Internet open and free prior to February of 2015. The former FCC chairman explained that Title II had actually worked to reduce innovation and investment over the past few years, largely due to onerous regulations and a myriad of requirements that create uncertainty and prevent small startups from getting their foot in the door. Trending, 5 miles from failed NYC bombing, Imam calls for deaths, to the very last one, Vishay continued to argue the opposite and theorized that the repeal would mean Facebook could subsidize faster internet speeds for themselves and gain preferential treatment while small startups would not be able to afford to do so. But McDowell quickly corrected him. Section I and Section the 2nd of Sherman Act and Section the 3rd of Clayton Act. You just triggered all three of those sections, McDowell replied calmly. That would be an antitrust violation. That was against the law before February 2015 and it will be against the laws of today. To hear people talk today you'd think the Internet started in February 2015 with Title II. That's not the case, McDowell stated, according to the Washington Free Beacon. An increasingly irate Vishay began to cut off McDowell and claimed that it was unfair that he was using too much legalese in addressing his speculative concerns about potential unintended consequences of the regulatory rollback. I don't feel we're having a really fair conversation here, the MSNBC host lamented. I'm trying to have a conversation on the merits of the principle of unintended consequences of reversing net neutrality, and you're dropping a lot of legalese. The legalese are the merits, Oli, McDowell shot back. That's what's at play here. Maybe you haven't read these laws and you don't understand them. I'm very familiar with net neutrality, Robert. I'm really not that familiar with being condescended on about the whole thing, Vishay replied, as he continued to ramble on about speculative unintended consequences that may or may not ever occur. McDowell calmly explained that the open Internet had been growing just fine and doing exceedingly well under the rules prior to the imposition of net neutrality, and stated, before February 2015, there weren't asteroids hitting the Internet every day, in fact, quite the opposite, it was blossoming beautifully. Related, Obama couldn't enforce red line for 5 years, takes Trump only 11 months. He further reminded Vishay that the previous open Internet came about because of bipartisan legislation signed into law during the Clinton administration, but Vishay refused to acknowledge McDowell's point and continued to bring up his various imagined scenarios of evil doing by giant corporations on the Internet. What you just said is already illegal, it has been a long time, and will be going forward. So that's good news. Sorry, it's good news, McDowell said, and added, it's good clickbait to say the Internet is being destroyed, but it's not. You can watch the entire MSNBC segment below, when it comes to the rollback of Obama's net neutrality and the liberal reaction to it. As highlighted by this MSNBC anchor, we are reminded of a famous quote by former President Ronald Reagan that seems especially fitting in this circumstance. Reagan said, "The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they are ignorant, It's just that they know so much that isn't so. Please share this article on Facebook to let everyone know the truth about the repeal of Obama's net neutrality. What do you think of how the former FCC chair explained the truth behind net neutrality repeal to this MSNBC host? Scroll down to comment below.